Could I add one point, Richard?
Sure.
Yeah, and on page 7, paragraph 2, cumulative analysis. The letter that the State Historic Preservation Office, because that paragraph deals with fish and wildlife, but the letter that the New York State Historic Preservation Office had indicated also that the proposed turbines for the St. Lawrence wind farm would change the whole visual impact of the region. And so I think that would be something that I'd like to see in the document, is the impact of the 500-foot high turbines on the region, not just Cape Vincent, but all areas that could see it. In other words, towns in Canada and towns in the U.S. It would be probably Teresa, Brownville, Lyme certainly, the town of Orleans, town of Henderson, and Hounsfield. At least, and other towns that might like to. If you go to Watertown now and just go up on Thompson Park, you can see all of the turbines on Wolf Island from there. So to the degree that these are very big and all of those communities may have projects, I think that that sense of cumulative analysis should be projected out.
Any other comments from
Richard, when I look at the map, you've done what is typically done, and that's basically take a parameter that doesn't encompass, in this case, our whole township. And what I would ask is that since you're projecting up to 124 and of various sizes, at least that's what Peter Gross indicated to Mr. Hershey and me, I'd like to encompass the entire township as far as impacts are concerned, particularly the visual, because what you cut off here is, I can't see far enough of the downriver side, but at least going towards the lake, you really haven't encompassed all of the township that leads all the way to Tibbetts Point.
Do you know if you intend to include visual simulations?
We will have visual simulations.
I actually would ask, are you prepared, Richard, to say what the distribution you're now thinking of size-wise and where they would be put? Do you have a...
I think we're still in the same position we were last time, which is the project size still varies between 200 and 285, and that'll be dictated by what turbine technology we ultimately wind up selecting.
Well, in that case, then some of your studies are going to have to reflect whatever sizes, whatever manufacturer. I mean, you're compounding your work for yourself as far as I can see, because it's what's the visual impact on a 500 versus what we see across the river, which are 1.5s and 1.7s. How they would impact on flights of birds and whatnot. And in particular, when the simulations were done, John, before, they all looked out into the river and into the lake. They didn't really look at where birds pass over the land or right along the shore. So, and the simulations were, from my vantage point, were very, very modest in how much they encompass of the flyway. Mr. Harris, it seems like we know what we're doing because we actually do. We've been through the Acciona all the way to the end of it and looked over the shoulders of the prior planning board and reviewed the documents that we were able to obtain on how they arrived at their conclusions. This group of people you're addressing really has done an awful lot of work. So and we've seen what Mr. Hessler has done. We've seen what other researchers have done to provide information for both Acciona and BP. And if you say we're holding a high standard, well, we figure that that's our place to be able to ask that.
you know that we've done a lot of work with updating comprehensive plan and zoning. And our guidelines have been health, safety, and welfare of the community. And every time we strayed from that in our discussions, we got our hands slapped and we went right back to it. I would like to see some significant information as far as turbine and blade failures. There's nothing that I've seen in the preliminary and the preliminary scoping statement. I think it's absolutely imperative that you address that. And I suggest that you address that when you're trying to decide what sort of setbacks you're going to look at. Please just don't look at industry standards. There's too many things that have happened that are outside of industry standards.
Particularly if the industry standards, quote unquote, are of what you've experienced. That's not a standard, it's not based on science. When I look at the NYSERDA material for the wind farms that are already up in New York State, it is what you've been able to accomplish through your lease requirements, and what the townships that have been occupied by the wind farm, what they understood they were allowed to argue for, and I, in my own vernacular, excuse it, it's a little slang, but it's basically what I have always thought what the industry could get away with. If a standard does not have a scientific background to it, it is merely what you've been able to accomplish or what the unit produces. And that is something that is mitigated by distance. And we do make the distinction between mitigation and compensation. Compensation is not adequate for this discussion. It's really you either mitigate it or there's an alternative. And the alternative, in my estimation, is always zero. So
You can eliminate the adverse impact or mitigate the adverse impact.
you can mitigate it or you can delete it.
To completely avoid the adverse impact.
Right. But not compensation of saying, we'll spruce up the paintwork on our lighthouse is not a mitigation.
So Dick, what you're saying is economic, that type of economic proposal does not otherwise mitigate the visual or other impacts that some of these sightings may.
That's correct.
Present.
I mean, it can be argued that it's an economic benefit to the town, but it is normally a short-lived benefit. The benefit, if we're talking apples and apples, you either do find something that can mitigate the situation, the adverse impact, or you don't do it, period. You go
We've been
with an alternative.
we've been very conscious of health, safety, and welfare. And you're going to tell me, well, I just said that. I'm going to say it again. We've been very conscious of health, safety, and welfare. We did not pull numbers out of the air. We used sound scientific methods to make our determinations. We worked through certified engineering firms. So we're asking that when you address these things, you do the same.
And it's also, from Mr. Harris's standpoint, the first comprehensive plan that we did in 2003, we have we updated our comprehensive plan and zoning law this year, last year. There's nothing specifically new in the comprehensive plan regarding large-size industrial projects that weren't there before. So this is I would argue that if you find things that aren't compatible with your project outline in our law, you're also going to have to address where their fault is, if you will, in our comprehensive plan. Because the two go hand in hand. And they really, to me, are not separable. So it's what, I'll leave it at that.
Well, it's just a point of clarification, the comprehensive plan as amended in 2012 was not received by the town board, it was adopted by the town board. So it is per se a planning tool that has been adopted and to be used by all applicants, notwithstanding the Article 10 application that you're going through. So when you deal with local law, that is, in essence, local law. That is local law that needs to be dealt with. And in addition, because the overall zoning codes were looked at the same time, those interface very, very clearly. The other thing, John, just for another point of clarification, the baseline of vision that the town has articulated in its comprehensive code was stated in 2003, and that baseline is not substantially changed in any way whatsoever. So that predates any applications by anyone, any entity, for industrial wind. That was the overall vision of the community by the community. It was done with input from the community without an application pending. There was nothing to beg the question. They just looked at who are we, where do we want to be, what do we want to look like. In 2003, that baseline was pretty well established. So in 2012, during the course of the moratorium, as is required, we looked at both documents and updated them. But the substitute changes in the comprehensive plan really were very consistent with what was previously articulated. Fair statement?
Better than I did?
Well, I don't know about that. That's why we got some new players here, and I just wanted to give you the historical context.
If I could ask you, Mr. Chandler, as well as yourself, Mr. Harris, have you guys had the opportunity to read our comprehensive plan for zoning?
I read it last year, but I haven't read it recently.
Do you respect that document?
Of course, I respect it.
Do you believe your project will have any adverse effects on our community?
I think we're discussing potential adverse impacts today. I think we've already articulated.
Do you believe your project as proposed, what I'm seeing on the map, would have adverse impact on the community?
I think I just said that.
Okay.
So you believe this whole process is created to help us ferret out potential adverse impacts and discuss ways to avoid those impacts, minimize those impacts, and mitigate those impacts.
Sure. Okay, I appreciate that. Have you been on the PSC's website looking at the comments from the public that they have chimed in with their input on your project?
I haven't been on there recently.
I've seen that there are comments posted on there, sure.
Okay. Would you say that the majority of those comments are in favor of your project?
I couldn't say.
Couldn't say. Okay. The last I looked at was not. You might want to take a look at some of those comments because that's what this process is about. Getting from public involvement. I mean, it's called a fit for a reason, the public involvement portion of this. So I think that would be important. Do you believe the ability of the project to produce adverse environmental, social, financial, and cultural impacts on the community would also affect the surrounding areas? I'm referring to Wolf Island, the town of Lyme, and the other surrounding towns.